There is someone that is very special, and I am very excited to introduce you to her. Introducing Elizabeth Amy James Yost. So Elizabeth joined us last month, and I am so excited to share my second birth story with you. And this time it is a very successful, positive VBAC story. So I did not document much of this second pregnancy, second child syndrome, whatever you want to call it, compared to when I was pregnant with Gabriel. I filmed so many different videos, pregnancy related, pack my hospital bags with me, all this other stuff. I did not do any of that with Elizabeth, mainly because I wanted to keep my anxiety level very low this time around, because if you did see my first birth story, when I had Gabriel, that ended in a 37-hour labor with me pushing for 4 hours and ultimately a C-section, because he was just malpositioned in my pelvis, and at the time we thought that my tailbone had hooked on his head, which I still believe happened, but it was a combination of him not being in a good position. So I really just wanted to keep this second pregnancy very low key, very low anxiety, and that meant for me not sharing much online, because that was a source of anxiety for me looking back when I was pregnant with Gabriel. Because you get so many comments and unsolicited advice from people, and then the algorithms on all the social media platforms start pushing you these stories and these things, and I just did not want that to happen this second time around. So this second time around, I made quite a few changes from my first pregnancy. My first pregnancy, I was still actively working as a birth doula at the time, and I was very gung-ho on having a birth center birth with midwives, and I did have midwifery care that time, and I did have midwifery care this time around as well. I just chose something slightly different. I went and chose a different hospital and a different midwifery OBGYN group. So it was an OBGYN group that works closely with midwives at a hospital that has a very low C-section rate and a very, very high VBAC rate, because it was very important to me this time around to have the opportunity to have a VBAC. Not to mention we had moved, so we are here at our new house. We're closer to this much nicer hospital. So yeah, it just made sense. So let's talk about my birth story. So in total, I was in labor with Elizabeth for 11 hours. That is such a much nicer time to be in labor for compared to 37 hours. And I only pushed for about an hour and 40, 50-ish minutes. And she came out. So my whole pregnancy experience this time around was, like I mentioned before, very different from Gabriel's experience. Gabriel, we had a few hiccups along the way. With my first pregnancy, I didn't know what I was doing. Even though I am a trained birth doula, I still did not know what I was doing, because it came down to it being my own body. I had two brains warring with each other at the time. On one brain of mine was like, you're a doula, you know this, you should know this. And the other part of my brain was very anxious and didn't know anything. So it was a battle of wills at that time. The practice that I was going to for my medical care was very different as well. And come to find out, hindsight 2020, at the time when I was attending the midwifery group that I had Gabriel with, they were a very, very, very good midwifery group, and they had a birth center, and they were very good. But the hospital and the, corporate that owned the practice and all this changed hands at the time, and behind the scenes those corporate entities were making a lot of changes that were making it very hard for the midwives, and ultimately it trickled down to the experience that all the patients ended up having. And I just ended up going into, having my baby, having Gabriel at the time, right at that cusp of things starting to change. So now when it comes to that midwifery group up in Annapolis, it's not the same as it was before, and it's kind of very sad to see how corporate greed has changed things for the worst. But I want to talk about this experience now, of the experience that I had here in Southern Maryland now, with this other midwifery OBGYN group, which, first of all, it is an OBGYN group. There are doctors there and there are midwives that assist them. So I did see doctors this time instead of just midwives. So I wanted to have all of my bases covered when it came to having this second pregnancy, because at the time when I first got pregnant with Elizabeth, I did not want to have an induction. I was either going to go into labor naturally, or I was going to schedule a C-section again, because I did not want to go through a very, very physically and mentally taxing labor. And that's what I found happened with Gabriel once I had the Pitocin introduced, because that can affect you because it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier, so your brain doesn't produce the extra hormones like the endorphins that you need to get through labor when it is a synthetic hormone like Pitocin. That's not saying Pitocin is a bad thing. Pitocin saves lives and it is very great to have, but I just didn't want to have that experience again. So going into this second pregnancy, I meticulously picked out, well, not meticulously, I knew from my doula experience that this hospital had a very high VBAC rate and a very low C-section rate. And they had doctors that worked very closely with midwives, and even some doctors that you almost forget that they are doctors. You think that they're midwives, but they're actually doctors, because they have that focus and they have that mindset of the fact that birth and pregnancy is not just a medical event, but it's also like a life event as well. So going into that, I picked that hospital, and my experience was chef's kiss this time around. When I went to go get my pregnancy confirmed, there was a little bit of a hiccup with scheduling, and because it's a very busy practice, but I ultimately saw Dr. Greenwood. He's the head doctor at this practice, and he is the one who it really calmed my nerves to meet him this time. And although he was not the doctor that ended up delivering Elizabeth, it calmed my nerves to meet him as the head of the practice and learned about how he kind of structures the practice and all the doctors work under him, what he believes, and it trickles down to them as well. So we talked about my previous birth with Gabriel, what went wrong with that, and we talked about my feelings at the time, and he kind of turned or changed my opinion on induction and recommended that I possibly get induced at 40 weeks or 39, 40-ish weeks, so that we could avoid possibly Elizabeth being a big baby like Gabriel was, and potentially mitigating the risk of her getting stuck in my pelvis like Gabriel had been stuck. So once he told me some of the evidence and educated me on all of that and his method of doing an induction, I was all hands on deck, really comfortable, felt a whole lot better. And the whole pregnancy completely uneventful. With Gabriel's pregnancy, we had a couple of times where I had to go see the MFM because just random concerns, but this time Elizabeth was smooth sailing. The only time I went into labor and delivery was very less than a week before I actually went into labor. She had some decreased movement, or what I thought was decreased movement, but she was fine. So now into the core of my birth story. So I was really feeling like she was going to come earlier than 40 weeks. Just because I felt like I wasn't carrying bigger than I had been with Gabriel. This pregnancy was definitely very different. I carried, my pregnant belly was wide with Gabriel, but with Elizabeth it was more outwards. And with that outwardsness of my belly, I was in a lot of pain in my pelvis and in my pubic area. It was just a lot of weight up front. So I was in a lot of pain. I was in a lot of discomfort. It hurt to walk, and I was just mostly laying down. And I just wanted her to come early. So around 36 weeks, I asked for my membranes to be swept. And my midwife at the time, she did. She swept them. Nothing happened. And then 38 weeks, had them swept again. Nothing happened. So it was one of those things where it didn't hurt, but it didn't help. So it was just It was just a little nothing thing. But let me see, I was like 39 and 3 days pregnant, and I had been having contractions on and off. Well, looking back, they were probably contractions, but at the time I thought they were just Braxton Hicks, for like a week and a half in the evenings. And I could go through my day and like sleep through them, and it was just uncomfortable. It was just annoying. It was always sitting on edge of, is this it? Is this me actually going into labor? And nothing ever came of it until Sunday morning when I was 39 and like 3 days pregnant. I got up because Gabriel had woken up and he needed to go to the bathroom. So I helped into the bathroom and I got him resettled back in bed. And it was around 4 o'clock in the morning when this happened. So I'm getting him settled back into bed, and he lifts up my shirt and he says, I need to talk to baby sister. I said, okay. He does that. He did that quite frequently, lifting up my shirt, wanting to kiss my belly and talk to my belly, all this stuff. He just lifted up my shirt and he looks at me. He looks at my belly like very intently, like he's actually looking at someone. And he says, baby sister, come out now and play with me. And he kisses my belly and he lowered my shirt and got back in bed and went to sleep. So I settled him down, and then I went and got back in bed. And at 4:30, exactly like on the dot, because I was like looking at the clock on my nightstand, I felt my first real contraction. And they kept coming, and they kept coming like every 10 minutes apart. And about after a half hour, 45 minutes, I decided to get up because I wasn't going back to sleep. I decided to get up and just come down here into the living room and sit on the couch like I am now and just drink my coffee. Because at that time it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. I had not woken anybody up. Gabriel was still sleeping. My husband was still sleeping. And my mom was here at the house and she was still sleeping. I did not wake anybody up because I didn't want it to be a false alarm. I didn't want anybody to lose sleep, because when I went into labor with Gabriel, I went into labor at night and I hadn't slept. I didn't sleep. Nobody slept. It was a miserable experience looking back. So yeah, I didn't want to be a bother. But around 5:30, after I had had my coffee, things were really ramping up and I was very uncomfortable and in pain at that point. So I went back upstairs and I tiptoed into the bathroom and I started running the tub. We have a nice soaking tub upstairs here at this new house. And I got into the tub, and while it was filling up, the sound of me filling up the tub woke my husband up. And he came in and he goes, are you okay? And I said, I think I'm in labor. And he helped me into the tub and he was like, what do I do? What do I do? Blah, blah, blah. I said, well, relax. They're not, super, I'm just started timing them at that point. He said, do you want me to wake your mom? I said, no, just let everybody sleep. And, I said, you rest, you make yourself breakfast, like do what you need to do, take care of the dog, start making arrangements to get ready for Gabriel to wake up, because I knew at that point that I was in real labor and that Gabriel would need to be taken to my in-laws' house. So he started slowly getting ready, and then in the tub, the hot water really helped with the pain, but they definitely were at that point now, after I had timed them for a little bit, 5 minutes apart, lasting for a minute long. So I was meeting the criteria of, okay, we need to start heading over to the hospital. So I called my doula, and she was at first going to come to the house. But after I got off the phone with her, Gabriel came into the bathroom. Jack woke him up, came into the bathroom and gave me a kiss and said, I love you. And I was like holding it together, not wanting to show that I was in pain or anything, because I didn't want him to be scared. And I told him, I said, I think baby sister is going to come today. She's going to come out of my belly today. And he goes, okay, she'll come play with me. And Jack took him out of the bathroom. And as soon as they left and I knew the car had driven away, things kind of shifted and got a little bit more intense. I drained the tub and I at that point got in the shower, because there were a couple things that were really important to me this labor. And this labor, I really wanted to labor at home as long as possible. I wanted to utilize the tub for as much as possible, and I wanted to be clean when I got to the hospital, because I wasn't clean. I wasn't like freshly bathed when I got to the hospital with Gabriel, and all the sweat, and it felt icky. I did not like that. So I got into the shower. My mom was in the bathroom with me to make sure, I was okay and all this stuff. And I washed myself, soap, shampoo, conditioner, got my hair done, body lotion, all, you know, in between contractions. That was a big goal of mine. I wanted to be fresh and clean and deodorant and the whole 9 yards. And Jack still had not come back from my in-laws yet by the time that was done. So I came downstairs. I was nice and clean. And I was just pacing around waiting for Jack to come back. And things were just happening. I was on the floor at some point, on my hands and knees as the contractions were coming. I threw up at one point too, which was not fun. I called Jack. I was like, where are you? And I knew just, of course, my in-laws were going to be excited and keep him there, like chatting, like, is she okay? And I was like, you need to come home now. So he rushed home. I jumped in the van and we drove straight to the hospital. And this hospital is about 30 minutes away from us. So we went to that hospital. I got in there. I'm ringing the bell for labor and delivery. And I was like, oh, I'm going to have to sign all this paperwork. They're going to make me sit in triage. And at that point, I started getting another contraction. I like dropped to the floor on my hands and knees. And when the doors opened up to labor and delivery and the nurses saw me like on my hands and knees in like active labor, they skipped triage altogether and just put me in a room. And they were like, oh yeah, we know that you're actually in labor. So they got me set up with an IV right away. And the doctor came in, and this doctor was, I hadn't yet to meet her, but I had heard stories about her. So she was one of the doctors that my doula, Shannon, is my doula's name, highly recommended and loved and loves currently. And I met her right there while I was in labor. And she checked me and she was like, oh, you're a good 5 centimeters dilated, which was fantastic because last time when I got to the hospital with Gabriel, I was only 2 centimeters dilated. So to be already 5 centimeters dilated, I was like, fantastic, let's go. And at that point, I had done everything I wanted to do. I had labored at home as long as possible. I got in the tub, I showered, I was clean, and I made it to 5 centimeters dilation. So I asked for the epidural. And I was worried I was gonna be waiting for like an hour, 2 hours, because sometimes that happens with anesthesia. And no, the doctor came right in within 30 minutes. So I got my epidural within 30 minutes of arriving into the hospital. I got my IVs in, I got checked, and the anesthesiologist walked right in, got me my epidural. The first time he placed the epidural, and it placed well, and it took away the pain, but I was still feeling a lot of pressure and what I describe as surges, to the point that I was still like vocalizing through each and every contraction. So the nurse called the anesthesiologist back in. He gave me a bolus of more anesthesia medicine or epidural medicine, and it went right away. So I was able to labor like that for a while. My doula and the nurses had me laboring in different positions in the bed with my epidural. So I had like an epidural that I could still move around in. I got on my hands and knees. I was on my side for a while with a peanut ball. I was on my other side for a while. I was sitting up, and at one point I was like, you know what, I'm just going to, you know, rest for a while. Actually, before that happened, they came in to check me again, and I was around 7-8 centimeters dilated, and I asked for my water to be broken. So they broke my water, and at that point I decided I was going to take a nap and just see what happens when I woke up. So I had gotten from TJ Maxx like a lavender eye mask to wear and noise canceling headphones. So I turned on my labor playlist that I had made, turned on the noise canceling, couldn't hear anything but the music, and I had my eyes, you know, completely covered with a nice lavender scented eye mask, and I was out. Next thing I remember was somebody with their hand on my leg just shaking me awake, and I opened my eye, I pulled off the eye mask and opened my eyes, and I could see them talking to me, but I couldn't hear them, and Hosier was like singing in my ear. And I just like had to rip everything off, and I was like, what's going on? They were like, we need to check you because you're having contractions that are 3 minutes long, and we think baby is coming out now. So if you hear any background noise, it's both Elizabeth and Layla right here next to me. So yeah, they checked me, and it was time to start pushing. So the doctor, she came back in, and she was like, I told her because this was my first time meeting her. I like gave a brief synopsis of what happened with Gabriel. I told her I was worried that was going to happen again. She was like, it's not going to happen again. And I told her, I said, this time around, I would like to try vacuum or forceps, anything to avoid a C-section again. And she was like, don't worry, I got you. We're going to do something called around the world pushing. So what around the world pushing entailed was me pushing a few times in one position, and then the nurses and the doctor getting me into a different position, and I would push a few times in that position, and then putting me in another position, and then I would push a few times in that position. And Elizabeth was coming down, and it was at that point that the doctor, she kind of stuck her hands inside and she said, okay, baby is what we call asynclitic, meaning the baby's head is kind of cocked to the side, which was the same thing that happened with Gabriel. And I was like, oh my gosh, here we go again. She's gonna get stuck on my tailbone. But she didn't. This doctor was much more trained in what to do in this situation. And so she kind of stuck her hands, sorry for being TMI, she kind of stuck her hands inside me and adjusted Elizabeth's head manually. And I did a few pushes like that. And then she got out the vacuum as I had requested, and she helped Elizabeth out that way. And within an hour 40, hour 50, Elizabeth was born. So because they used the vacuum on Elizabeth to help get her head out and her body out, the pediatrician was there on standby. And I just remember them putting her on my chest. Her eyes were open, and I was like saying hi to her and everything. And I was waiting for Jack to cut the cord, but the pediatrician everybody was rubbing her. She wasn't crying yet, and she looked a little blue, a little gray, but I know from working as a doula that can happen sometimes, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I wasn't too worried about it in that moment until the doctor, well, not even until the doctor just kind of whisked her away to the warming table. And my doctor, the OBGYN, she like got in front of me and she was like, you have a 2nd-degree tear, we're gonna need to do stitches. And she was just talking me through everything. And behind her, a bunch of stuff was happening, but she was distracting me in that moment. And I was calm in that moment. We delivered the placenta. She stitched me up, and I hear a cry. I finally hear Elizabeth cry, and my husband is pumping the air like this, like going, yeah, yeah. They bring her back to me. Everything's good. She latches right away. It was fantastic. Once everything started calming down, I was then told what had happened in the background behind my doctor while I was getting stitched up. And what had happened was Elizabeth's lungs did not fully... They're inflated now, but at the time of her, when she was born, they did not inflate when she was born. So what the pediatrician had to do was manually inflate them with a tube by sticking a tube down her throat. And my husband watched all of that happen, and he said it was very scary. And my poor husband, he was traumatized from the situation for a few days, and had to talk about it and a lot. And he was very worried for Elizabeth for about the first week, until we were told by our regular pediatrician that she was all cleared and fine, and no bad side effects from that situation. But that was the only bad hiccup that really happened in her birth. Now, once we switched to recovery, that is a little bit of a different story. Still a good story, nothing scary, but because it was my first, my second pregnancy, but my first vaginal birth, I was experiencing I had a much different experience over on the recovery side. I moved you guys closer because she needed to nurse a little bit, and I don't want to show all that on camera. But we moved over to the recovery side, and recovery was different than it was with Gabriel, because of course with Gabriel I had major surgery, but this time around I did not. So once the epidural wore off, I was up and walking. I took a shower right when I got into my room, and I got into a fresh hospital gown and just settled in. And of course the nurses had to come in and do their fundal massage, which is them pressing on your belly. And oh my gosh, was that painful. That was the worst part of the whole experience. So with Gabriel, I had a spinal block, so I didn't feel it the first couple of times when they came and did it. So I didn't remember it hurting that bad, but also I did not have that bad of diastasis recti with Gabriel that time around. With this time, it was very different. I definitely have more, and I still have more diastasis recti, and that's when your abdominal muscles separate, and because of being stretched out from pregnancy, and they weren't activated, and it was just so painful. Moving at all was painful just because my core muscles were not working and they were kind of screaming at me for being pregnant and all. And on top of that too, I had no bladder control. So that was a very humbling and embarrassing experience. Genuinely having to be in diapers for 2.5, almost 3 weeks, and then now I'm still in pads still. But I'm told that's all normal from a vaginal birth. But it was new to me. So Elizabeth was born rather early in the day because I had a shorter labor. Again, it was only 11 hours. Started at 4:30 in the morning, ended at like 3. She was born around 3. So around 5 or 6 o'clock, my in-laws brought Gabriel, and Gabriel got to meet Elizabeth for the very first time that same day. And he was so excited, and it was just, I just cannot put into words just exactly how great of an experience it was this time around. And then again, on recovery side too, I also utilized the nursery. So when I had Gabriel, that hospital was called a baby-friendly hospital, meaning they don't have a nursery. You have to room in with your baby. You have to immediately establish breastfeeding. You have to, like, they come to you for everything. So it was a constant cycle of people in and out of our room when I had Gabriel. And recovering from a major surgery and that happening was not fun. But this time around, the hospital I gave birth at, despite it being, not even despite, it is a great hospital because they got rid of their baby-friendly accreditation and they still have nursery. So heck yeah, we opted to have Elizabeth go to the nursery for a few hours that first night and even the second night so that we could sleep and get a solid 2-3 hours of uninterrupted sleep. And I knew that she was in a safe place. I was very comfortable with this hospital. I was very comfortable with the security measures that they had there. I was very comfortable with all of the nurses I had met. So yeah, I slept soundly, and so did my husband. And they brought her back to me whenever she needed to breastfeed. And she has been breastfeeding like a champ. So I definitely think that made a huge difference with this experience as well, was having the ability to send Elizabeth to the nursery and having the nurses kind of understand and be very respectful of that choice after the baby was born, because they recognize that you need sleep. You just did something really, really hard, and yeah, you have to be a parent now, but like, part of your recovery is that you need to sleep for a solid couple of hours because you just did something really hard. And whenever they needed to do tests or anything on her, like her hearing test or her PKU test, or, you know, measuring her, they took her to the nursery. So it wasn't a constant rotating door of people coming into our room and disturbing our peace and disturbing the little bit of sanctuary that we made. They came and they took her and they did everything all at once out of the room and then brought her right back. I think Jack went with her a couple of times. He could go and like watch through the window or something like that, I think. I can't remember. And yeah, it was just a night and day difference. Complete night and day difference. So like I mentioned before, I was having some issues with my abdominals and with my bladder, and of course I had a 2nd-degree tear. So when I did come home, I was dealing with that for a good 2.5-3 weeks of being in pain and just taking Tylenol and ibuprofen around the clock. So yeah, that was not fun, but it was a whole lot better than being cut open the first time around. It just wasn't something I completely, totally expected. But yeah, that was my second experience having a baby and having a VBAC, which, yay, I'm so excited I got to do that and didn't have to go through surgery again, and she didn't get stuck on my tailbone. And having a knowledgeable medical team that kind of knew what to do in that situation definitely made the difference. But I would show you guys to her one more time, but she's still eating. But you guys will definitely see her along with Gabriel here and there on upcoming videos, and I do plan on getting back to filming regular content once again. So if you like what you see here, if you like what you heard, if you want to see more, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!